I really believe that a lot of higher ed teams have better stories around them than they realize. The problem is usually just access. It's finding them, identifying them, creating the conditions where people are actually willing to share them. And if you want stronger video, stronger written stories, stronger campaigns, stronger social content, the finding part matters a whole lot. You can't build great storytelling content from generic inputs. Hey, welcome to the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast, a show where we bring together Marcom leaders from both inside and outside higher ed to give you fresh perspectives on successful content creation and strategy in higher education. My name is John Azzoni. I'm the founder of Unveiled, a video production company working specifically with colleges and universities. Learn more about our work, including our subscription approach to storytelling at unveiled.tv. That's UNVEILD. And if you like this podcast, then you'll love the Higher Ed Storytellers Digest. It's my free weekly newsletter where we cover a lot of ground about content creation and strategy. Sign up at unveiled.tv/newsletter. All right, let's get on with the show. We talk a lot on this podcast about what good storytelling and good content creation looks like, about taking risks and doing things that are different and finding things that are remarkable to point the camera at and having a good hook and having some conflict and student is the hero of the story and all this stuff. And a lot of times when we seek out like how to tell a good story, we're assuming we have a story to begin with. But what if the hardest part of that isn't the filming and it's not the editing, it's not how you tell the story? What if the hardest part is getting the right people to raise their hand in the first place? Because that's the most important part of the storytelling process, is starting with a good story. And I know that a lot of schools are running into this too. I've talked to, many of you who we've worked with directly and who have tried to find stories, students and alumni whose stories they want to tell, find that it's like pulling teeth. It's hard to get people to raise their hand and say, yes, put me in a video, put me in a print article, things like that. It's easy to find people who maybe had a good experience and who, the professors or department heads can point to and say, yeah, this is a good person. She has a great personality and has a cool internship. Okay, well, that's a start, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's a whole emotional ecosystem around that internship and why it matters and all the things that make good storytelling good. So we're talking today in this episode about casting, finding the students, finding the alumni, finding the people with stories that are actually worth telling and getting them to say yes, because if you can't do that part, the rest of the machine doesn't matter that much. I'll give you an example of, earlier in my career, I used to direct a lot of corporate videos, and most of corporate video making is pretty boring because most businesses, they're on computers, they're in meetings. I don't care if you're a law firm, if you're a tech firm, whatever else, web design, graphic design. It's just a lot of times it's just people on computers and on the phone and in meetings and maybe like getting coffee or something. And so a lot of times that's really hard to dress up. How many different ways can you make that environment look really interesting and make people want to watch that whole video? So I always found that hard as a director, trying to make things that weren't interesting look interesting. And then contrast that with this one experience I had. At the job I was working at, I was directing a video shoot for a jeweler. She makes like jewelry out of like live flowers. And she brought a professional model because we were filming a course, like an online course that she was going to sell to her big Instagram audience. So when we're done, she'd made all the stuff. She had a professional model come in. And as soon as we started filming the model, it was like the model just like understood the assignment and just took off and started modeling. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting the best footage and this is easy, and I didn't have to tell her every direction to turn and put your hand here and tilt your head to this side or whatever, because I don't always know what to tell you to do. But it was like this light bulb moment of like, oh, this is what it's like to work with things that are actually interesting to begin with. It makes my job as a director, or maybe your job as a marketing director, enrollment marketer, whatever, the person that gets to shape that, from a macro perspective and really make it sing, make something interesting, even more interesting, then your job isn't making something that's not interesting, trying to fake it into being interesting, which is a lot harder. So it was a moment for me of directing becomes easier, more fun, and the final product, because the footage was really awesome. The final product is so much better when you're starting with something good to begin with. You can have the best production process in the world. You can have great editors. You can have nice cameras, lights, all this stuff. But if you don't have people with real stories, you've got this like content engine with nothing to run on. And so I've been thinking about this a lot because at Unveiled, one of the things we talk about is what I'd call plug and play casting system. While we can help you build the system, like we have a system for people to click a link and they can submit a video of themselves. And we have the email templates that come before that to even get people to click the link. And then we have a whole back-end system that can organize them. And we guide the client through the process and we make recommendations and stuff. So we've got the container to make casting happen. But what we don't have is the upstream solution to how do you get people to raise their hand and say, I have a story to tell? Because the reality is they're not going to do that. You have to go find them. Not only, finding people that have remarkable things to say, but are willing to participate in the marketing. So that's a problem I'm trying to solve and thinking a lot about it. I've been talking to some of our clients and, the general pattern that I'm hearing is that finding people is like pulling teeth, so that's a problem for me to solve because, if you're going to hire Unveiled to do videos and we're here saying we're here to make this easy, but there's a part of the process that we're not involved in as much, because our job typically starts once people start submitting stuff, submitting themselves to participate in this. If that part that's on the client's plate is not easy, then that's attached to the whole process of making videos. And so thinking about how to solve that. And in this episode, I want to talk through a few things I'm experimenting with, some thoughts I'm having, some things and some considerations that make this process difficult that we need to consider, and talk about some possible solutions. And then I'd also love to hear from you. If you've had a great experience, with finding great stories and getting a constant flow, like a culture of finding stories to, happen at your institution, I would love to hear about how you've done that. From the outside, it seems like finding stories should be easy because you're on a campus full of them. We hear that all the time. You could throw a rock and you could hit someone with a great story. But being surrounded by stories and actually like surfacing them are two very different things. That's where the friction shows up. A school will often say, we need a bunch of, stories to tell. We just do the storytelling initiative. And that all sounds great. But then the real work starts. It's like, okay, well, it's one thing to get a video company. And then it's like, okay, well, who do we feature? Who's available? Who's compelling? Who is actually good on camera? Who's going to actually show up and follow through on the shoot or whatever? So suddenly, as we've experienced, the timeline for this series, this project starts slipping. And as we realize, casting is taking a lot longer. And so here's the first issue I think that people run into when they go looking for stories is that it's not easy to just send out a mass email and say, hey, submit your stories, and then you're going to get a flood of stories. It just doesn't really happen like that because I think students and alumni hear this phrase like, tell your story or whatever, and then a lot of them immediately disqualify themselves because in their mind, the story has to be huge. It has to be dramatic, impressive, emotional. It has to sound like something that belongs in a glossy, campaign marketing piece. We'll think about this episode as my world is video. I'm just going to talk about it from that. But, broaden that to a print article, a blog article, an email, newsletter, whatever else, because I think the problem still remains is like, where do you find these interesting people? And it's hard for them to raise their hand because they often don't think that they have anything interesting to say. But that's usually the wrong filter. Some of the best stories come from these small moments, like a student who maybe almost transferred, but then didn't, like almost left, or like a data science student who was bad at math. I've talked to people like that where it's like an oxymoron to be bad at math in data science field, but they're there and they have succeeded. I mean, what a great story for other people who struggle with math like me to feel like, oh, I can actually participate in a really mathy field that interests me. A lot of times it's not these big hero stories. It's just maybe these more subtle moments and these subtle tensions that happen before the big bang sort of outcome. And a lot of people never volunteer those stories because they don't realize those moments actually, count too. They think what you want is this polished, like, I loved my school, I had great professors, here's all the reasons why: small class sizes, world-class, whatever, faculty, I got a good job. And all that stuff is fine. Like, those are good outcomes. Those are the outcomes you expect when you go to college or when you send your child to college. But that's the punchline. Where's the part before that? Where's the uncertainty, the doubt, the little specific details that make something feel really human and like unpolished? That's what people connect with. And I think about it like stand-up comedy, because what makes a good joke work? The punchline is important. You need that for sure. Some of my favorite comedians are great storytellers because they go on this whole journey of like setup, and it's like the pacing, and it's this odd detail that makes you like be like, oh, I do that too. It's like this oddly specific thing that you connect with that is hilarious because you've never heard someone else identify that. And then it's like the turn, the surprise, this punchline that came out of somewhere that you didn't expect. It's all that stuff before the punchline that matters. And so we need to do a better job of helping students and alumni and, see that in themselves. And then, faculty, department heads, deans, all this stuff, have a radar for that kind of stuff as well. The second issue is motivation. Why would someone do this? I mean, really, like, why would a student stop what they're doing, fill out a form, talk to a marketing person, get on the camera, or do an interview for a text article, carve out time in their schedule, probably feel really nervous and self-conscious, worry about saying the wrong thing, worry about, it's some PR disaster, that they cause. Why would they do that? Sometimes there's a gift card involved. Sometimes there's, some little incentive, a sweatshirt or a t-shirt or whatever, usually free lunch. Sometimes we've experienced people just are excited to be featured, and that's great. But a lot of the time there's still not enough there as a general rule, like as a system that works predictably every time to overcome that negative inertia, those decision blockers that keep people from saying like, yeah, let me step forward and expose myself to all this discomfort. The default response for most people is, this sounds like work. Someone else will probably do it. Maybe I'll come back to this later. Later never comes. That's just human behavior. I have like 3 unanswered texts right now that I have to respond to after I finish recording this, because I'm just like, I see them pop up while I'm working. I'm like, I'll get to that later. It's just a people thing. It's a thing. And I think marketers sometimes assume that being featured is automatically exciting. And for some people it is, but for a lot of people it feels like effort. And maybe the video that would be useful to them in getting a job is not the kind of video that the marketing team is going to make, because the marketing team is about promoting the school. They're not about promoting the student necessarily for the student's own, singular purpose. And, the reason we go out and find these stories is because we want other people to connect with this student, and we want it to reflect positively on the school, and we want other people to come to the school. And for a lot of people, just, the excitement, the what's in it for me is just not big enough to overcome that effort and that discomfort. Here's one hill I will die on. Making one-off videos whenever your team or some other department decides they need one is the most expensive and wasteful way to do video marketing for your college. What you need instead is a system that provides you a steady stream of video content all year long. And that is what our video storytelling subscriptions are all about. Get a year's worth of videos that are primed for distribution across awareness, consideration, and yield for one price. Take the next step at unveiled.tv and book a call with me. I'd love to hear what you're working on. All right, let's get back to the show. Third problem is platform. It's email. I know, everybody has to use it. I get it. Email is the default way to reach people because there are lots of automation. It's probably built into your CRM to mass email people, and you could probably put some little merge tags in there that make it feel personal and stuff. And that's kind of like low friction on your end, on the marketing teams. But mass email is rough. A message goes out to, a student list that says, hey, tell your story, be featured, and then you get nothing or almost nothing. And it's easy to interpret that as nobody wants to participate. But I think what's happening is maybe A, the ask is too broad, or the inbox is too crowded. Everyone assumes someone else has a better fit of a story. The sender usually feels distant from the student, and it's not someone that they feel like they are actually interacting with or might ever see at some point on campus. The email gets buried, and there's no urgency, there's no specificity, there's no reason for them to think, oh, this is for me. So when you're asking for stories through email, the prompt has to do way more than just like submit your story. The phrase is way too open-ended. It sounds like homework, and people do not volunteer for burning extra calories, mental calories, emotional calories, and doing more homework on top of the homework they're already doing. Another thing schools do is ask faculty or department heads or staff for referrals. And I think that is directionally smart, and you should do this, but there's a catch here, because if the people referring the students don't have a strong sense for what makes a story compelling, you tend to get the same profile and over. You get the student ambassador who's going to tell you all the list of the great things about the school, the senior who's polished and has a great experience, the alumni that maybe has a cool job now. That's the punchline. They've got a cool job, but like there's not a whole lot else there. You're more likely to get really safe stuff. And again, nothing wrong with those people. I love those people. And a lot of times those types of stories are necessary. We have 3 parts of the funnel here. You don't need in all parts of the funnel someone to go on this tangent of a story. Sometimes you just need someone to say, this place is amazing. You'd be dumb not to come here. That's not a story, but that is a strong marketing message. So nothing wrong with those types of stories, but in general, you want to find people who can tell you more. So like, what happened? What specifically? What almost went wrong? What changed? What surprised you? What did you believe at the beginning that turned out to be different? That's the sort of journey type stuff that people can emotionally connect with. And if nobody in the sourcing process is trained to look for that, you end up with a lot of people who are excellent representatives of the institution, can give you a 5-star Google review, but are less interesting storytellers. And now you have the hard work of digging and digging and digging and trying to find something interesting. If you ever dug a hole with a shovel, it's hard. It's very hard. It's exhausting. I did it in my backyard when I planted 2 apple trees. I was sweating. I was tired. The difference between trying to dress up a generic story and starting with a good story to begin with is like the difference between a hand shovel and what'd you call that? An excavator or something with the bucket thing that just digs a big hole. It's like, boom, hole. So at the highest level, the umbrella over all of this is a culture problem. So it's the culture of not being on the lookout because other things are yelling louder. And so you wait till the need for content starts yelling louder. And now you go back and you try to find stories. But the best time to find stories is not when you need them. It's before, it's when you have the space to be curious and things like that. So you've heard it, there's that movie with Alec Baldwin that just says, always be closing. And then like coffee is for closers only. I would say always be casting, ABC, always be casting. But really, what I mean is this: story sourcing can't be something you think about only when a campaign kicks off. It can't be just like once a semester, like a scramble that you do once in a while. It has to become a habit. It has to be a campus-wide habit, even better. The strongest version of this is cultural, faculty noticing stories, advisors noticing stories, student life staff noticing stories, career services, alumni relations, people across campus starting to recognize moments, worth documenting and know where to send them and know where they're going to end up. That's the ideal. But most schools aren't there yet, which is fine. You don't have to, pretend that you're there. But if you want stronger storytelling a year from now, that muscle probably has to start getting built now. Because when that muscle doesn't exist, every storytelling initiative begins from zero, and starting from zero is expensive and tedious and pulling teeth. It costs time. It costs momentum. It's a lot of work, and it usually ends up in weaker finished content. So if the long-term play is culture, what then are some practical ways to get there sooner? So here's some things that I've been thinking about to go from zero to better stories in a shorter amount of time. Number 1 would be stop relying on cold opt-ins. Look for people who are already creating content or already talking publicly about their experience. This could be students posting about campus life. This could be people making TikToks, students using Instagram stories a lot, alumni who are active on LinkedIn. people already showing some willingness to be visible because those people have already crossed an important line. They're comfortable sharing. They're comfortable with the attention being on them. They're comfortable being seen. They've already raised their hand in some way. Now, that doesn't automatically mean that they have a great story. Some of them are just going to be all surface level, just vibes. But it's still a better starting point than asking a totally cold audience to volunteer their story and to self-identify as having a story. Because at least now you're starting with people who are more likely to participate, who are already out there sharing their life and are probably more in tune with what's interesting about their life. The downside to that is that can be really manual. And right now, a lot of it is. I'm thinking about that a lot because I do think that there's room to make the process more efficient. But even if it's manual, it can still be useful. You're hunting where people are already active. That's usually smarter than hoping, the perfect story randomly shows up in some form submission. And the other thing I'm thinking about too is when people are posting on those contents, reaching out to them on that platform. If someone's active on Instagram and you send them an email, they're not hanging out in their inbox. They're hanging out on Instagram. DM them on Instagram, DM them on LinkedIn, on TikTok, whatever. That's a different play, I think, that we need to start making as content creators, sourcing material to tell stories with, is reaching people where they're at. I've heard this a lot. That really does literally mean go where they're hanging out and talk to them there. The second idea is about making the first ask smaller. So a full, documentary style feature is a big ask, especially if the person doesn't know you. They don't know the marketing team. They're busy. They're not used to being interviewed. Don't start there. So start with something easy. So a 30-second voice memo, a 3-sentence text response. I know NPR Moth Storytelling, I think at some point they had like a voicemail line. Like you could just call this voicemail line and tell your story and then be done. And then they might reach out to you to go on the Moth stage and tell the story or something like that. But they had a low friction way to talk about yourself and submit your story. So now the barrier drops, and that changes a lot because once somebody gives you a small yes, you can learn a lot. Do they have a strong perspective? Can they communicate clearly? Is there any emotion there? Is there anything specific? Do they respond quickly? Do they seem up for it? You're screening and building rapport at the same time, and that's huge. From the participant's perspective, they're not signing up for some giant production. They're just answering one question. That feels really manageable, and I think we need to get into the habit of prompting people in smaller ways, but more on that later. I think a lot of institutions would just get way more traction if their intake process felt smaller, faster, more human. And that leads to the next idea. Your prompt has to help people recognize themselves. So my wife and I listened to this podcast called Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard and Monica Padman on the way when we go on road trips and stuff like that. And they do this series called Armchair Anonymous where they will post a prompt, a story prompt. And then all the listeners, they call them armchairies, will submit their wild stories. And then they sift through them. They pick a few to bring on the air for the Armchair Anonymous episode. And those are our favorite ones to listen to because some of these stories are so wild. So many twists and turns, but they're so specific. They're great because they're very specific and the prompt was very specific. It's not tell me a story. It's tell me a story from this particular context. So they give people a very specific doorway. For instance, tell us about the wildest thing that happened at graduation. That's the one we listened to on the way up to Northern Michigan last month. And then when people hear that prompt like that, they instantly know whether they have something for that. That's the magic of a very specific prompt. So specificity helps people self-identify. So maybe your prompt is tell us about a time a professor changed how you think. Tell us about a moment when you almost gave up. Tell me about an unexpected friendship that shaped your college experience or your favorite meal that you've ever had in college and why was that meaningful? Tell us about the first time campus felt like home. Whatever. Those are better prompts because they're specific, because now somebody can hear the question and think, oh, wait, I do have something for that. You're removing the confusion of I don't know if I have a story. And your social team could run prompts like this through Instagram story question stickers. So maybe once a week, you're posting one of these question sticker prompts and allowing people to submit and engaging with those. Maybe someone submits a really interesting one and you reference that, whatever, you can put the answer on the screen or whatever, and then you can talk over it or whatever, you engage with it. And it becomes a thing. It becomes a thing that people want to submit to because they want to engage and they want to be featured and, they want their story to show up in the next story and whatever. And then mix in some fun ones, like what's the most embarrassing thing that happened to you in class or something like that. It might have nothing to do with marketing the school, but it could just get the momentum going for submitting anecdotes. And some of those could be pretty gold. But the broader point is that it feels like lower pressure. You're making participation feel casual and human, and that's a much better environment for getting real stories. Another thing I think schools should do more of is ask for stories in moments when emotion is already elevated. Timing matters. Graduation week matters. Capstone presentation day matters. The final critique in an art program matters. The last clinical rotation, the end of orientation. These are all moments across the student journey where people are already feeling something strongly. They're proud, they're relieved, they're overwhelmed, they're reflective, they're emotional, and that's when they're ready to share a lot of times. If you wait 3 weeks and send an email, the feeling is past. So maybe it's a QR code on a program or something like that. Maybe it's a text to submit prompt. You're getting people's phone numbers and you're texting them to submit. Maybe it's a quick, booth setup kind of thing. Maybe it's a staff member with a phone, like a man on the street thing, taking an iPhone video, asking, one strong question. Just like nothing fancy, just a way to meet people while the emotion is still available, because people tell better stories when they can still feel the moment they're describing. And if you want faculty and staff to help source stories, the process really just has to be simple. You don't want to ask a professor to write a whole paragraph. They're not going to do it. And that's okay. So lower the lift. Give them a one-click nomination form. Student name, 1 sentence about what happened, done. You can follow up if there's something worth following up there about. Because I guarantee that faculty see meaningful moments all the time. They see students push through hard things and transformations and breakthroughs and personal issues and, discomfort and whatever else. They just don't know to connect it to anything bigger than that moment, specifically in that box. So build the easiest possible path. So yeah, this is something I'm actively thinking through right now. These are some just thoughts that I have collected that I am experimenting with currently. I wanted to share with you because I really believe that a lot of higher ed teams have better stories around them than they realize. The problem is usually just access. It's finding them, identifying them, creating the conditions where people are actually willing to share them. And if you want stronger video, stronger written stories, stronger campaigns, stronger social content, the finding part matters a whole lot. You can't build great storytelling content from generic inputs. So maybe the question for your team is, how are stories getting surfaced on your campus right now? And where is that process breaking down? Do you have a culture of collecting stories, or are you just waiting for the next campaign and then you're going to hurry up and try to scrape some together? Because once you can answer that, you can start fixing it or tweaking it. And I'd love to hear from you. Genuinely, what has this looked like for you? Because this is a universal problem. And people in higher ed have addressed it in different ways. And I want to hear what your ways are. How have you had success, or how have you had failure with trying to find people to raise their hand and say, I have something worthy to say? Send me a note and let me know. You can email me at john@unveiled.tv or find me on LinkedIn, JOHNAZONI, if you're searching for me. Okay, that's all I got. It's really hot in my office because I have the air turned off so it doesn't wreck the audio, but it's like 100 degrees outside in Michigan. So I'm just going to stop here, okay, and go wipe the sweat off my forehead. Okay, bye. Hey, thanks for listening. I want to give you 2 things before you go. Number 1, reminder to sign up for the Higher Ed Storytellers Digest. It's my free weekly newsletter for Marcom leaders where we talk about all things content creation and strategy in higher ed. Subscribe at unveiled.tv/newsletter. Number 2, follow me on LinkedIn. If you're searching for me, my name is John Azzoni, and it's spelled JOHNAZONI. All right, I'll catch you on the next episode, and in the meantime, I'll see you in your inbox. Okay, bye.